And welcome to our panel. We're going to have a wonderful discussion today, looking at how innovative finance can support refugee integration. Obviously, themes around finance, private capital, and ESG are right at the top of the agenda in the current day. And we are going to be looking today at some of the real cutting edge of those themes, in particular, looking at innovative financing solutions which can contribute to the mitigation of social issues, so the S in our ESG agenda. We're going to look at that through the prism, in particular, of refugee and migrant issues. And we note that innovative finance can be used to help in these circumstances in a number of different respects. Refugee and migrant issues are set to be a real material issue in the future. Well, they already are today, but increasingly so. The New York Times has reported that the climate modeling and some of the most extreme climate scenarios involve millions and millions of migrants, for example, heading towards the US border over the course of the next 30 years. We heard at COP26 about how youth migration is occurring increasingly as the youth moves away from agriculture, and this is going to lead to more and more issues around food security, for example. We need to look at what businesses can do and what financiers can practically do to both to help mitigate, so to halt again migration drivers, and also to maximize opportunities for economic value creation when migrants arrive at their destination. We need to look at a variety of potential structures here. We need to look at social impact bonds and direct investment options, as well as the acquisition opportunities for purposeful brands in this space. We need to consider the practical challenges, the solutions, the pathway to obtain solutions. Perhaps maybe the solutions are not really yet all on the table, the details aren't all worked out, but that's no reason to not start progressing. And we need to look at the benefits for business. So how can this be turbocharged by being aligned with corporate purpose? How can we create more magnetism, more drive towards businesses being involved with these innovative financing structures that are going to ultimately help to solve social problems? I'm joined here today by a fantastic panel. My name is Bryony Widdup. I'm a partner at DLA Piper. I work in finance and in ESG related and sustainable finance and investments in London. And the rest of the panel are going to take a few minutes to introduce themselves. So I will turn straight over to Liz, who can start off today. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Liz. I'm the Social Impact and Sustainability Manager for Sundial Brands, which is part of Unilever. And Sundial Brands is a company that was founded by Richelieu Dennis, who himself was a refugee from Liberia, and established a big beauty empire in the United States as a result of his experience there, and then sold the business to Unilever in 2018. So I can talk more about that experience and also how we source our products in Ghana. Who would like to go next?
Is it Cedric next? Cedric?
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm very glad and honored to be part of this panel. So my name is Cédric de Ternay. So I'm the Chief Investment Officer of the French insurer Generali France. And I will share with you a fantastic experience that we had in creating a new social impact investing solution, Generali Investissement à Impact, a year from now. So in Generali, we believe that today's social challenges require a new approach. We are definitely anticipating that a new economy is built up with both socially and economically inclusive environment. Therefore, we are using, for the time being, the recovery of the economy to rethink about our product design, in building up social and solidarity within our own offer. So what I would like to share with you today within this new experience that we are currently stepping in is definitely the way how this new vehicle is built up to invest on impact investing. So for the time being, what we are currently doing on the innovation side is the following. We are investing in companies and associations dealing with social issues addressed by the Generali Group Foundation, the Human Safety Net. This foundation, the Human Safety Net, has two different purposes. One is to support vulnerable families. The second one is to contribute to the integration of refugees through entrepreneurship and work. Therefore, as an insurance company, so we committed in investing 12 million euros in this new fund, appointing a dedicated asset manager specialized in impact investing in Co. This new fund is dedicated to retail clients, and this is definitely distributed through our unit-linked network. And our goal is to create an harmony between different stakeholders, the client in one hand, the community in the other hand, and also the company, the insurance company, Generali. So from the client side is benefiting from a new innovative saving solution by bringing both economic performance and common interest. In the meanwhile, they are expecting financial return together with positive impacts, especially being useful, let's say, to others. In order to, let's say, leverage on the community. Leveraging on the community means to supporting most vulnerable families and refugees, and especially the refugees, by supporting the refugees entrepreneurial project in order to help them to find a professional path and to get a professional integration. From our side, as long-term investor and especially insurer and as a product provider, we expect to boost the new financial offering with this new impact fund, linking the dots with what Generali Foundation, the Human Safety Net, is supporting both vulnerable families and refugee entrepreneurs. What we get from now is the following. We get, for the time being, two different recognition, whereby this new fund obtain two labels. One, the Sustainable Recovery label from the French state, France Relance, and also a label from the Solidarity Economy with a dedicated French association. In a nutshell, what we expect to do is just to answer to the client needs. What we discovered starting from the beginning of this year is that 60% of our unit-linked order are investing on ESG funds. Therefore, it was also an opportunity for us to link the dots between what impact investing, especially with this new innovation on refugees, is able to bring on the table for in order to meet, at the end of the day, our client needs. I hand over to Maha.
Thanks, Cedric. Maha.
Hello, I hope you can hear me. Nice to be here today. Yes, you can hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So, head of the positive impact business in BNP Paribas. And as such, we work on a approach to help social businesses, social enterprise with impact to develop from multiple points, which can be either financial or non-financial. It's an approach that we called Act for Impact, in which the bank really is a partner to all those social businesses having an impact to all the defavored, disadvantaged population, but not only, because refugees,
may be having some more connectivity issues. We've had a few already, trying to overcome the technology. Maybe we'll come back to Maha when she rejoins us. Helen, do you want to go next?
Yeah, of course. Thank you very much. And thank you for having me here on this panel. I really hope Maha's able to join us because I was looking forward to hearing more about her project. So yes, my name is Helen and I am a policy fellow working on migration and displacement issues for a think tank called the Centre for Global Development. We're based in Washington and London. And our displacement workstream is focused on ensuring that refugees and other displaced people have the right to work, move and thrive. And we're looking at ways in which policymakers, donors, and the private sector can come together to make this happen. So we're particularly focused on refugees and displaced people in low and middle income countries, as that is where the majority of them live. And we're especially looking at Africa and Latin America. So I think two of the projects that we're working on at the moment are particularly relevant to this topic. So the first is a partnership with Refugees International, and we're looking at what prevents refugees and displaced people from fully participating in the labour markets of Ethiopia, Kenya, Colombia, and Peru. So as an example, in Colombia, Venezuelan displaced people legally have the right to work, but many can't get their qualifications recognised, they can't get financing to start a new business, or they may face discrimination among employers. In contrast, in Kenya, refugees are confined to camps far away from labour market opportunities, which are largely in urban areas. So without the ability to travel, refugees are really confined to working in this limited camp economy. The second is with the International Rescue Committee. And again, we're looking at the specific barriers that urban refugees face in Kampala, which is in Uganda, and Nairobi in Kenya, as they differ from refugees in camps or in other areas. So we're really at the early stage of this project, which is very exciting, but we're looking at what combination of support provided to refugees. So this could be financing or mentorship or childcare. What makes the biggest difference in enabling them to access work opportunities? So, as I hopefully outlined, both projects are really trying to bring together both economic and social research with policy outreach to try and understand and shift policies in these areas. But doing this requires having a really in-depth understanding of what the needs of refugees and displaced people are in different circumstances. So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Everybody has different levels of education, skills, experience, desires, and they live in countries which support or inhibit their ability to be able to exercise these in different ways. And in many cases, it actually requires going down to the regional level. So really having a look at which employers are available, where opportunities are, and how best to integrate refugees into these economies. So we would argue that the private sector can play a really strong role in supporting refugee economic inclusion and shifting these policies. So the most obvious thing to do is obviously hiring refugees, and there are many companies in all of these countries that do hire refugees and displaced people, as well as integrating refugees and refugee-led businesses into supply chains. But what we've really tried to do with both of these projects is to show that the role of the private sector can actually go further. So companies can use their unique voice and bargaining power within countries of destination to argue for expanded support for refugees. And many companies have, they've spoken very publicly and globally to advocate for better refugee support. So we hope to support these companies and hopefully many, many more to think about how they can best engage in this sort of refugee economic inclusion space. So hopefully that's a useful quick overview, but I'm really looking forward to delving into this topic in a bit more detail.
Fantastic. Mika, I think we're with you next.
Hyvää iltaa, good evening in English. It's my pleasure to join this panel discussion. My name is Mika Pyykkö, and I'm working as the Executive Director of the Finnish Brain Association, but I think that the reason that I'm here tonight is that until end of the last July, I was working 8 years in terms of impact investing, first in the Finnish Innovation Fund, Sitra, was in charge of developing impact investing ecosystem and activities there. And then last 1.5 years, I was leading the Center of Expertise for Impact Investing as a part of the Finnish government. And 2017, we launched the SIP called Fast Employment and Integration of Refugees and then more broader migrants. And maybe I can give you some background information why our government wanted to launch that kind of social impact bond in the country like Finland. And very brief introduction to that moment is that, as you know, that Finland is the Nordic welfare state, which means that our government and our public sector is supposed to play very strong role in terms of everything needed in our society, in terms of social health care, in terms of education and everything. And when we had the idea in Sitra, Sitra is a think and do tank working under the control of Finnish Parliament that we want to import the idea of impact investing to Finland. We got the idea that in the Nordic country like Finland, the best way to be able to prove the additional value coming from private capital is to combine public sector and private investors together, which means that we focused on outcomes contracting. And in order to do that in practice, we started to plan different kind of social impact bonds. We discussed with our government people. At that time, I was working in Sitra, and my team was in charge of developing starting points for those social impact bonds. We really discussed very much with our government, with different ministries, with our municipalities, and asked those people, our colleagues there in public sector, what would you like to do if you could have some additional private capital in order to support our society? And everybody was talking children and families, of course, that is our future. But then we faced the refugee crisis, even in Finland, 2015, 2016. And we are the country who was not used to have that many foreign people, you know. We are used to have maybe 2,000, 3,000 foreigners per year coming to our country, and suddenly we have 40,000, 50,000 people, which was the huge number of refugees, and for us, foreign people coming to our country. So our government decided that this is the right moment to really implement some innovative approach in order to give opportunities for those refugees and migrants to become integrated to our country. And so we were lucky to work for the social impact bond on behalf of Sitra together with our government, maybe 12 months or something, in order to be ready to launch that social impact bond, which was the biggest social impact bond in Europe at that time when it was launched in the beginning of 2017. And the main purpose was really to give that kind of fast track for refugees and migrants to our labor market. And it was that kind of matchmaking service between migrants, refugees and migrants, and needs of in our labor market. And maybe one more detail concerning that social impact bond was that the fund size was 40 million euros. So it was the biggest one in Europe. And we were lucky to get new investors to step into our market. And of course, European Investment Fund played a very crucial role, but one of our investors, for example, was Finnish Orthodox Church, so very new investor in our market. Maybe that was enough as an introduction why I'm here tonight, and I'm happy to share our experiences. Thank you.
Thanks, Mika. Last but definitely not least, Sharon.
Thank you. And thanks everybody for tuning in, and thank you for inviting us to speak on this panel. My name is Sharon Pakfar. I'm the Chief of Private Partnerships and Philanthropy at the UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR. For those of you who don't know what UNHCR does or what our mandate is, allow me to just give you a brief overview of who we are and what we do, and then how that works with the private sector and in relation to innovative finance. UNHCR is the global agency responsible for, mandated by the General Assembly, for the protection of refugees, displaced people, stateless people, and and returnees. Excuse me. The organization was created in 1950, following the events of World War II, and we had hoped that we would be out of business by now, frankly. But as ever, we have a growing refugee and displaced persons number of persons around the globe each year. We work in 132 countries, so we're very global. We have offices in around 480 locations, often the most remote places in the world, where refugees and displaced people are often seeking protection. As a reminder, we also work with asylum seekers, but not with migrants. And we, define refugees as those people who are forced to flee due to conflict and persecution. But we did hear earlier that this type of definition is growing, and I think it was discussed as well during the COP with regard to those who are being forced to flee as a result of natural disasters or climate change. And we are, looking at all of those that are on the move as a result of their lives being in danger. Our purpose is to safeguard the rights and the well-being of those that are forced to flee. And we work in a wide variety of areas. Of course, protection is the main pillar of our work, and emergency response, and we're the first people on the ground when there is an emergency and people are crossing over. But we also look at lasting solutions, and that's a recognition of the fact that most refugees are displaced for an average of 20 years. And so that emergency response cannot last forever. And we really do hope we can support refugees both in their country that they are being hosted in, as well as in their countries of origin. We work in a number of other areas, of course, including shelter, the provision of water, sanitation, education, economic inclusion, and livelihoods, health, maternal and newborn women and girls, anything you can think of with regard to our persons of concern. We work across those areas. As mentioned, as I mentioned at the start, the numbers have grown, and at the moment we have over 82 million people that have been forced to flee their homes. And it's a crisis that's affecting the stability of all societies and economies. Of course, developing countries are carrying the biggest burden, with 86% of people of concern hosted in those countries. And we know and recognize that the challenge ahead of us, and the challenge we've been facing for the last several decades is enormous, and no single entity or stakeholder can address it. This brought us to the Global Compact on Refugees in 2015, with the recognition that it requires, and it takes a whole of society approach to really address this challenge and those that we face in the Agenda 2030 or the Sustainable Development Goals. We see the private sector as a key actor, as a key stakeholder in the solution. I, in this role, have in the past 4.5 years been leading our engagement with the private sector, and that includes through various types of corporate engagement, whether it be through long-term partnerships with some of the world's biggest brands, that are, between the philanthropic space as well as the shared value space. And we work with foundations as well as philanthropists to really find the best solutions to the refugee context. In this light, a few years ago, we started to look at innovative finance as an important tool to both bring efficiencies as well as help develop new solutions to help us address some of the challenges we face. And in UNHCR, the way we look at that is basically to support our work, but not through traditional donor-funded grants. And we are developing a toolkit that helps bring us more sustainable, efficient, and effective resources for the benefit of the people of concern, across a wide range of stakeholders. And that can include investments, impact bonds, swaps, funds, guarantees, blended finance, and other vehicles, depending on the specific priority that we're looking at supporting. And a key principle for our innovative finance work has been that the financial tools used in every project are designed specifically to meet the needs of the country and the context and the sector in question. So every project is designed in a bespoke way with strong internal and external participation, but actually the important component is to develop it locally, but with the ability to scale. Because as I mentioned, we are global and we work around the world, and we need to be able to scale these tools.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I
Sorry.
can stop here.
I think we just had
Got a new participant.
We just had Darwin join us, and Maha has been on and off a couple of times. If Maha reappears, we'll try to re-include Maha at that point. But Joywin, do you want to just give a brief introduction to yourself? Now we're just finishing off the introduction section.
Sure. Thanks. First of all, apologies to the audience and to all of the panelists for the slight delay. I had a bit of an IT glitch, but I'm glad. Better late than never, I suppose. I'm a partner, a capital markets partner with DLA Piper, based in London. So I'm a partner together with Bryony, and we together we tackle together with our bread and butter work some of the methods by which innovative financing can help with social causes, especially one which we are going to speak in the next 30 minutes about. So. Why I'm here is to kind of describe how our day-to-day bond work and all the technology that we can employ within finance can be translated into very useful mechanisms to address the very pressing issues of refugee resettlement, etc. So that's my quick introduction, and over to you, Bryony.
Thanks, Joywin. Maha, I think you might be back.
Yes, hopefully. Hope we are. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yeah.
So I'll make. Okay. So maybe just I don't know where I was, but in BNP Paribas, actually, we have developed.
Oh no. Oh dear. Okay, we might have to leave my truth for now. Never mind. Okay, so thank you everybody so much for your fantastic introductions. And I mean, just to recap on a few of the statistics that Sharon raised. So we've got, I think it's 82 million people, Sharon, at the moment, who are displaced.
Can you hear me again?
Hi, Matt. Yes, we can hear you.
I'm sorry about that. I don't know what the problem is. I keep getting kicked out of the room. So what we do in face of refugees integration is a lot around migration, specifically language learning and specific internship programs that we support either from banking point of view or through innovative finance in place as blended finance or impact bonds, and also through, of course, donations. And finally, after job integration programs, we have worked with a lot of the ecosystem that help refugees integration in order to put programs in place either with us as an employer or with our many clients to encourage them to actually have to employ some refugees on specific jobs, like first as interns, where they can really learn the employment, and they can also continue learning really the language, and then to actually be employed as in a permanent manner. So this is a program that we did in France, but all the domestic countries of the group.
Okay. Well, at least we've had a little bit more introduction from Maha. Maybe we'll See if she rejoins.
I don't know if someone already started or if I
No, Maha, you can
go
carry
as
on.
if nothing happened. Then we also have a program on housing, which is a very important matter on refugees integration, especially when they are when they just arrive. Program something with their some association who actually work on emergency housing, where we work with them. So we do this especially in France, Germany. We also work with associations on the young refugees, for example, Fondation d'Auteuil, on an impact bond where refugees that are still minor
One more minute, we'll see.
Nice.
I think you're back, Maha.
And maybe hello.
Hi.
Yeah, I'll just finish with something. I say everything, because it's really complicated. So it's how we support businesses that have refugees on whatever should be housing or language or employment, and we are in the 10th coalition. I don't know if you know about it, which is a 10th partnership for refugees, an international coalition who gathers big international corporates committed to integrate refugees. And in France, we are a lead of this coalition with a lot of our clients, actually, to create a favorable environment there for their employment through for the employment in some specific sector where it's easier to have refugees integrated. And we also are developing a impact bond who specifically targets young refugees to them create directly their employment through technical training, very specific technical training. And we have another impact bond with Singa, Association for Integrating Refugees, on a specific program on housing where the refugees are directly welcomed into families in order to help their integration direct. I'm sorry about this hectic presentation. And over to Mika. I don't know who talked already. Sorry, out of the room. So.
Everybody else has done. Thank you. You've done very well. Thank you for the perseverance, and thank you to everybody watching for your patience. I was picking up before on some of the statistics. Sharon raised some really interesting ones. 82 million people displaced, who will be displaced on average for 20 years. I mean, it's an extraordinary scale of problem, and not only that, but as has been said a few times, it's growing. So finding these scaled, flexible, locally orientated solutions to these issues is absolutely vital. And it's wonderful to hear about BNP's existing impact bonds, for example, or Mika, what the Finnish government has already been doing around this. But what seems very clear is that the need to engage much more broadly across many more businesses and at much more scale for every part of the economy is really, really necessary in order to begin to tackle some of these problems and hopefully create some mitigation around the drivers to migration, as well as tackling some of the longer term consequences that we've already heard about. So I think we'll start by turning the discussion to business rationale. So if we're going to scale these solutions, we really need to drive private capital in this direction. And so how can we create business rationale? And you know, why would businesses want to be involved? Shireen, maybe we'll start with you.
Sorry, I had one moment of technical challenge. Thank you. I mean, businesses being involved with humanitarian causes is obviously nothing new. And I think, you know, many of those on the line, obviously Generali, BNP Paribas, yourselves at DLA Piper, Unilever, have all been involved in, you know, in a variety of ways, both in the refugee sphere as well as other causes. And I think that's, you know, an absolutely integral part of the social responsibility agenda. As we look forward into sustainability, social impact, and the way in which business interacts, I think, you know, part of it is that, you know, there is no option. Business, you know, we are the challenges that we face are so great that the UN and humanitarian organizations cannot address them without the support of business. I think, you know, the days are gone of businesses supporting for simply, you know, transactionally, and I think getting businesses much more involved in an authentic and integrated way is critical to the future of the way we work, to help us bring efficiencies, to help us bring innovations in what we do. It has an added advantage in the fact that when businesses are engaged authentically, and we have many partners that have had this experience and have fed back to us, it has an extremely positive impact on their employees, on their customers, and we hear this, you know, day in and day out from our key partners, that it's a great sense of pride for the employees, and that they really look forward to visiting the projects that the partner is supporting or engaged in. They want to volunteer their time, so we've seen this more and more, and it is incredibly important for the morale, but as well as bringing legitimacy to the whole social impact agenda, and in the way that business can be genuinely engaged and not tokenistically. Over.
Thank you. Yeah, so the non-financial drivers being key, and the authenticity piece as well, I think is something that we at DLA certainly see as really high, you know, vital. Mika, maybe we'll just ask you, in terms of your experience with, you know, engaging private businesses with public programs and the interaction there, you know, maybe what's the balance that you see between the non-financial drivers and the financial drivers, and you know, what's your experience?
Thank you. I think that we don't use the term philanthropy too often in Finland, because somehow we are used to have business or then government, you know, either or, and nothing between those two main stakeholders. And if I focus on our fast employment and integration social of migrants, social impact, I can say that businesses are involved to that social impact bond in two different ways. And the first and most important is, of course, that our investors are private investors. And we have highlighted all the time, and when we are talking about, or even we are talking about social impact bond, it's real investment business. It's nothing to do with philanthropy. And we have been repeated that story in Finland very many times. And our idea has always been that the IRR should be somewhere between 5 and 8% when we are talking about our social impact bonds here in Finland, including that migrant social impact bond. It's not too, that IRR is, of course, it's not too high, but I think that when those investors who are stepping first into this market, they have some kind of societal responsible idea in the DNA. So the IRR is high enough for that kind of frontline investors. And in our cases, it seems to be fair enough for that kind of societal orientated investors who show the way to more traditional investors. And the other way how businesses are involved to our SIPs is that our service providers, they are really normal companies. Very many times when we are talking about social impact bonds globally, we are talking about NGOs or voluntary sector as a service provider. But again, in our cases, they are very hard business companies who are working for our SIPs and for our government and for migrants in our cases. And we are very satisfied with this kind of combination. Thank you.
Great, thank you for those insights. Fredrik, maybe over to you. You know, how do you see it from Generali's perspective? You know, obviously, large international private business organization with some very sort of high on the agenda initiatives around these topics. I guess, you know, how would you say that you see the drivers both for your business to be involved, but how do you see using that to encourage more other businesses to be involved, to kind of, you know, begin to spread this out much more broadly through kind of the whole economy?
Yes, currently our choice was to provide to our customer the opportunity to step in this business, in other terms, through this new impact fund, to invest on the way how to satisfy the use of their saving, you know, to have a positive impact and also to get long-term positive return. So as Mika said, I mean, we have exactly the same philosophy. We're not here just to provide philanthropy, but just to provide a new layer within which our customer, our own policy holder, are able to invest their own savings on a long-term basis with a positive return. So we are able, let's say, to mix up according to this stream the real ambition that we have in order again to support refugees' professional integration within the different companies that we are investing in. So we are providing either loans or investing directly within capital, but with always to have two things: positive impact in one hand and a positive long-term return. The difference with what we offer till now is the time for market. At the end of the day, we need to buy time to let those companies grow and to let them go at the end of the day. But that's where, let's say, private investor and especially retail business can fit with the use of their saving, especially on long-term saving side.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, you know, some insights there into the types of products that can be created to increase interaction on these kind of socially orientated financial products. Helen, do you have any other thoughts, any other ideas on kind of how, you know, the importance of this can be raised up and spread out more broadly through the whole economy?
Yeah, just a few. I mean, definitely don't have as much experience in this area as others, but as I kind of said before, we've been really trying to make this business case to particular companies as to why they should engage in displacement issues. So we've heard a lot already today about corporate social responsibility, which is obviously incredible, and I'm glad that businesses are engaging for that reason. But we've also tried to argue that there is a really strong economic rationale for trying to engage with refugees and displaced people. So three of the things that kind of frequently come up whenever we have these conversations. So the first, we've already heard a lot about hiring refugees and engaging refugees. And I think there's a lot of human capital potential within these populations that can really be harnessed. So, you know, there's a lot of countries, including some of those that are represented here today, that have huge labor shortages in a number of different areas. And a lot of these refugees have their education, have those skills to be able to contribute in those areas, or be trained up to fill gaps where needed. You know, as a great example, as I mentioned before, we're doing a lot of work in Colombia. We found actually that Venezuelan refugees are on average actually more educated and more skilled than local Colombians. So it's, you know, a no-brainer to try and make sure that you're integrating them into your labor market to be able to, you know, make sure that they're contributing those skills. The second is establishing sort of sustainable and resilient supply chains. So we know that refugees are more likely than other local populations to be working in industries like accommodation, food services, manufacturing, and retail. And we know that many refugee-owned businesses, they support national and international supply chains, and their labor is incredibly important for these businesses. But, whether that labor is legal is a particularly interesting question. So, as a great example, we were working with H&M recently, who realized that many Syrian refugees were working in Jordan for their suppliers. But at the time, those Syrian refugees didn't have the legal right to work. And H&M realized this could cause potentially huge reputational damage for their company. And they therefore play quite a strong role, actually, along with UNHCR, who's represented here, and many other actors, in lobbying the Jordanian government to allow Syrian refugees to work legally, which obviously benefits their supply chain. And the third I'll just quickly touch on is increased brand loyalty. So some really interesting research that the Tent Partnership for Refugees, who's already been mentioned today, have done, which is looking at why consumers buy products. And a lot of it today is around a company's reputation. What do they feel like the company is doing to be a good social company? You're really engaging with social issues. And we think that sort of hiring and partnering and engaging with refugees is just one way that companies can build comparative advantage in this space. And so we really do feel like this is a strategic moment for companies to start engaging in these issues, and that there are a number of really good reasons why they should do so.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much. Moving on, I guess, from the drivers to kind of get private businesses and private capital into these structures, and looking at more of the practicalities around setup. So, I think in terms of, we've already talked about, well, Mika mentioned, the sort of this idea of like stakeholders, silos perhaps becoming more blended. So, philanthropy, public and private sector players coming into more of a sliding scale of participants in this area, and breaking down some of the traditional sort of siloed approaches that the different parts, those different stakeholders might have played traditionally, which I think we can talk about it, but I think is one of the key features that we need to see continue in order to create scale. We need those silos to be broken down, and we need that participant base to kind of have like a much more flexible, interactive role across these innovative financing structures. And I think that's really what's being encouraged as far as what I can see. So, given these increasingly blurred lines, Joy, maybe we could just hear a little bit from you about some of the practicalities of trying to implement a structure with different types of participants like this, trying to come together in a single innovative financial structure. What are some of the challenges with that, and how can they be overcome?
Absolutely. So from a financing perspective, I suppose, if you break it down to the various pieces, we have investors on the one side, one hand, looking for risk-adjusted returns. You have the demand for capital coming from various quarters, and how do you use finance to find the most efficient use for it? So, for instance, let's say you need a sum of money for a refugee resettlement program. Now, one way to do this is to actually tap the pool of private investors, isn't it? So how do we do that? Let's say you apply the same features that you would see in a bond transaction, where you have investors on the one hand, you use the proceeds from the bond issuance to or use the bulk of the money that you get from bond issuance towards resettlement of refugees, for instance. What you do as a backstop there is, you do not want that finance to be costly. So if you have a backstop where you have donor countries, donor organizations providing credit enhancement, guarantees, etc., what that helps is it enables you to front load the investments, without having to wait for funds to trickle down over a period of time. Because anecdotally, we've all seen that if if capital is available to make a large scale investment in, let's say, for example, a refugee resettlement, the effects would be much more tangible than seeing this happen over a period of time. You can have funder donor countries stand behind capital. You can have you can harness the credit enhancement, let's say, possible within the private sector too, where they would be willing to stand behind, let's say, a resettlement bond, for instance, and give better risk-adjusted returns to investors. Investors here, the benefit is that you're not looking at just impact investors. You're also looking at investors who are looking at the prospect of investing in the transaction because it actually makes pure commercial sense, because the risks are in many ways addressed as far as their investments are concerned. And from our perspective, we are actually seeing how real change on the ground is possible because of the sizable pool of capital which can be harnessed out of this, out of using the technologies which is available through mainstream finance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Anybody, Liz, maybe, do you have any thoughts on interaction with governments in this context? And maybe we'll try Maha in a minute as well, so get it ready. But Liz, I don't know whether you've got any. Oh, you're here. Okay, great. Liz, shall we go to you first? Any thoughts on interaction with governments? Maybe how that can help, or or maybe what the challenges are with that in these structures.
I suggest let's go to Maha first, since she's here in the moment, and then I can follow up.
Maha, let's try you.
Yeah. So the interaction with the government. It has been quite complicated at the beginning because sector in France, for example, and maybe in other Latin countries or providential state countries, is really seen as the main provider of subsidies, and they say, okay, we don't really need the private sector on those on actions because we state are fulfilling all the needs. That's on products impact or social impact bonds or environments. It has been quite difficult actually to convince the government to get into them because they didn't see the value added of having a private sector intervene as for them they would give more money without having to remunerate investor to gain on those products. For example, this was an example, and also complication. I think in governments, what is complicated is that there is the size of the budgets or a refugee.
Give Maha a few seconds. It's his hand. See if we get her back. It's an interesting point, though, about public authority resistance to engage in private capital on the basis that you then have to offer some level of remuneration as opposed to being able to funnel the entire amount towards the relevant project or impact. I do see that changing, and
an issue that it should be done by. Sorry,
Maha, continue.
Someone else.
We just lost you a bit.
I'm sorry. I think there is a problem and there is a delay in the so.
Please continue.
Okay, so I'll just go on talking. I don't know if it's out. Okay. So I was saying that what is complicated with the refugee thematic, it's that it shouldn't be treated by budgetary silos like housing, employment. It should be treated as a global, not used to treating global thematics as a global, but they each of the ministries, they will treat each of them their own problem. And if you go like this, refugees, then the integration is really not so good, and it isn't very well done. So an approach where you decluster, you explode the clusters of the different government, of the different silos of the government, in order to have a global integration, and see the integration of the refugees as a global components that are integrated. I think it's very important to have that. And so this is one of the things that we try also to help the government to see, and to try actually go beyond through mechanisms of innovative finance, such as impact bonds or such as blended finance mechanism, where we can go beyond those silos. Sorry again about this.
No problem. Liz, we were going to hear from you next, maybe. If you, I mean, there's a couple of themes here. So I think we've got, first of all, this kind of integration with the public, with the public sector, with public bodies. And, you know, we're also looking at the practicalities of implementation of these structures, both in terms of the stakeholders, but also in terms of, you know, what's needed to really make these structures effective. So, you know, practicalities around implementation, you know, more broadly as well, will obviously involve things like establishing the right local linkages with the relevant impact, establishing the right sort of, you know, engagement then with the stakeholders on the local level, not just the stakeholders sort of at the sort of, if you like, the investor level or at the top end of the structure, and then being able to effectively measure the consequences once you've got the investment in place. You know, how do you actually measure that? How do you monitor all of that stuff around MRV, the measurement, the reporting, and all the verification piece in these structures as well? So maybe you just have some thoughts on that too. There's a lot in that, but feel free to take any of those topics.
Sure. And the first thing you said definitely kind of echoes what I was going to say, which is kind of collaboration with local organizations and local governments. So we source our shea butter from cooperatives based in Ghana and Burkina Faso, with a supplier who has helped us set up these cooperatives where the women are able to not only, what they would normally do is collect shea nuts and sell it to an intermediary to be processed somewhere else. So instead, they're actually able to produce the shea butter themselves in these cooperatives. So they'll get a higher income just from doing that activity, but then we're also paying premiums, Fair for Life premiums, as well as a bonus to each individual. So that way to ensure like what we call fairer than fair wage. So that, you know, that leads to economic empowerment, that allows them to send their daughters to school, allows them to enroll in healthcare. So there's lots of benefits that can flow from this model. And I think initially when we were invited to be on this panel, we we're like, well, what do we do around refugees? You know, like, yes, we were founded by a refugee and he was incredibly successful when he came here. But I think the way we thought about it is, how do you build resilient communities so that people don't have to leave? You know, obviously you need some stability in those areas in order for that to happen. But I think in terms of success, you know, our partnership with our supplier and their partnership with local community resource management organizations has really helped facilitate that. So, for example, if the local community normally would cut down trees to make money in nationally protected lands, now they're working with those community resource organizations to divert the folks who were doing that work into then producing shea instead, or collecting the shea nuts, but not chopping down the trees. So that way, then they're kind of working with those organizations to make that not only social impact, economic impact, but also an environmental impact, reducing deforestation. And so I think a lot of it is creating those super local partnerships, and then also reaching out on a larger scale. So for example, our supplier just received a grant from USAID And so now, instead of just Ghana and Burkina Faso, they can expand to Mali and other locations in Ivory Coast, so that this model can kind of expand. So it's, you need the big companies like Unilever and big organizations like USAID and government organizations to do that like macro expansion, but you also need the micro partnerships on the ground and the people who are very aware of what's happening on the ground to actually execute this.
Yeah, I mean, that hugely resonates. And I think one of the advantages that organizations like Unilever, also like DLA Piper and others on this call have is the ability, because of our global network and global reach, to work within your own organization in a considerable number of jurisdictions directly. And that's a huge strength. But it's not a strength that obviously that every business who may ultimately want to and or who we need to get involved in these types of innovative financing structures has. And so I think the ability for organizations like the ones I've mentioned, and others, to be able to pass on that strength of international network is really, really key. Thank you. Shireen, maybe we could hear a bit from you about data in this context.
Sure, thanks. Well, it's something that we're investing heavily in. I think over the last 5 or 6 years, a real recognition that in order to design the right type of programming, then we need much more data. And being an organization that has the responsibility for protection of up to 82 million people, that's a lot of data. And we've been in this business for 70 years, but it's until 5 or 6 years ago, it was always seen as humanitarian and life-saving. And when you're doing humanitarian life-saving work, you don't collect much data. You're spending a lot of time trying to keep people alive. And that's basically the only data you collect, or as sad as it is. But over the last 6 or 7 years, we've been collecting a lot more data and recognizing the importance of data in that journey between the humanitarian world and the development world, and looking towards creating outcomes and long-term outcomes for refugees. We have established the Joint Data Center with the World Bank here in Copenhagen, and that's been operational for about 2 years. And they've been, looking at socioeconomic data in particular. And I think, as one of the speakers was mentioning, a lot of the data, I think it was Helen from CTD, that a lot of the data we're collecting is also about, refugees, the repayment of loans, refugees, performance in the labor market, refugees' education level, and also how do our programs perform. And as we moved into the innovative finance sphere, we also recognized that without having data and being able to show impact, then we won't be able to engage substantially or meaningfully in the world of attracting private capital and investment into our programming. And so, more and more data we're collecting that, we're linking the projects to impact and strict measurements. And that's helping us determine the financial health and the sustainability of the projects that we're proposing. The impact, and a lot of the innovative financing tools are sort of based on results-based, they're results-based payments. And so those structures like impact bonds and other sort of results-based vehicles really have to look at that impact in order to convince investors to get involved. Now, because some of this is so new, that's what we're trying to build up in order to attract the investors. And that's, I think we're going to, discuss a little bit later about how many investors we've been able to attract. But we recognize that it's incredibly important. And if we're able to generate income, based on those results, then we can, help those tools like repaying concessional loans or replenishing a revolving fund mechanism, that will allow the train really to leave the station. But we're still in that sort of establishment phase. I would say.
Yeah, increasingly the role of data. I mean, I'm going to talk a little bit in a second, but about reporting, because and Cedric, we might come to you if you've got a few thoughts on that, because I just think with the products that you've been developing, you know, all of our financial institutional clients are under this increasing burden for delivering reporting. So if you think of these investment structures as, you know, like a stack, at the very top end, you've got increasing pressure from all sides to report more, better quality, across more scope, you know, across risk and results type data. So and then when we look down from there through the investment structures, it's very, very difficult to then start to actually pick out valid, auditable, measurable data points at the very bottom that then can flow up the structure. So it's really interesting listening to you, Sharon, on some of the information, you know, that you've been looking at that is measurable, that you can capture and that you are able to report. And I think in terms of attracting additional capital and sort of that trust and certainty around these structures, it's really, really key that we continue to enhance abilities in the data and reporting area. Cedric, do you have any thoughts on that, just to kind of wrap up on that topic?
Yes, but that's really key. The way how the metrics are designed with regard to this kind of impact investing, and especially with regard to refugees. So as it has been said, I mean, already data are key, but we need to ensure that we are coming back to the intentionality about what we expect to bring on the table before measuring it. So we need, first of all, before, let's say, entering, and this is the way how we are moving ahead with this new investment plan for retail customer. We are currently providing not just the business plan at the end of the day, but just to understand what should be designed from the international intentionality that we expect to bring, let's say, on the table. And the main issue that we have is not just to issue one metrics for this fund, but is to combine all the different sub-investment and to find a way how to let's say to explain the entire story with all the different items that we're currently investing in. So data are key, but also the key performance is bringing with the entire philosophy about the dimension that we want to put in place. And the other point is that this metric is not simple to monitor, especially over time, but everything is based on the way how intentionality before investing within a new theme is built up in order to have clear clarity about the long-term investment and the path that we expect to get.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, that that resonates a lot. I think we'll slightly shift pace. We need to come on to some of these questions, but so maybe for just a couple of minutes before we do, we've got some questions here to think about around when you have built value. So when you have kind of created something which is well structured, which has good data and reporting lines, which is auditable. There's some interesting questions, I think, about how do we wrap that up in an appropriate structure? We've heard quite a lot about social impact bonds, but maybe there are other structures as well that we can wrap up value in, and then distribute that value more broadly, maybe offerings, public offerings, etc. So how is that possible, and what are some of the maybe the innovative structures that we might be able to implement around that? And then how can we make capital, whilst we're doing all of that, how can we make the capital that is being put into the structures work harder? So Liz, I think you might have a few thoughts around this. Maybe we could turn to you first.
Sure. So I think our history is very interesting as Sundial because, we started out as this independent business and then were acquired by Unilever. And I think through that acquisition, Rich Dennis ensured that the work that they were doing in the community would continue, alongside the sustainable sourcing practices that we had kind of ingrained in our DNA, was also the creation of a $100 million fund to support women of color entrepreneurs. And that is specifically, a fund that will help businesses grow, like a venture capital fund, in which, as you probably all are aware of, access to venture capital is much more difficult for women of color. And so it's encouraging entrepreneurship with the idea that there's this feedback loop of, okay, I was successful. Now I want you to be successful. And then you're going to help someone else be successful. So I think, encouraging that feedback loop, and, it's happening here in the United States where these funds are located, and also happening in Ghana and Burkina Faso where our cooperatives are, where the women are now empowered to support their families and getting more education, access to healthcare, access to banking, and then hopefully paying that forward as well. So I think that idea of that positive feedback loop, it's ingrained in our company as community commerce, but I think it's a model that, a lot of folks can use. And, the other thing I'll say is that we are a certified B Corporation. So that's a way to hold us accountable to our commitments and to our work. That's not just what we say, but also what B Corporation will audit us on, so we can ensure that our consumers know we're holding ourselves to the highest standards.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of innovation, isn't there, as well, not just in specifically finance. I mean, I'm a finance lawyer. When I say finance, I think about some of the things that have already been mentioned. I think about bonds and loans and derivatives and indebtedness type structures. But it's really, the innovation here is really not just around finance. It's also around the ways in which community value can be held in, they're not corporate structures, but the ways that community value can be held in organizations that can then have, public facing roles. So these community value companies, etc. I think that's a really key piece running alongside the development of finance, because once you've got that kind of structure, maybe in the local community at the bottom level, you've got something to fund. You've got something to funnel funding and capital towards. That's a kind of an organized structure, but that has its values directed in a much more specific way towards community and towards the issues that are trying to be tackled. So yes, I think that's also another key theme. Okay, maybe we should just turn to some of the questions, because I would like to give everybody at the end a minute just to give some final thoughts. So that probably gives us hopefully about 5 minutes for questions. So we've got some interesting questions that have come in whilst we're on sort of structures and bonds. One of the questions here says, which other actors could commission social impact bonds? Is there an opportunity to engage global actors who would have an interest given remote employment opportunities? I mean, it's quite an interesting question, I think, around, who else could be involved here in structuring and sponsoring these kind of financial instruments? Anybody want to take that?
I could be a volunteer. I think, see, the thing about finance is it's very malleable. You can deploy the tools of finance into various situations. At the end of the day, it's all about finding, apportioning risk, providing a return, and trying to make finance work as efficiently as possible. So, in a social impact bond, perspective, the question was, is there an opportunity to engage global actors who have an interest given remote employment opportunities? My answer to that is why not? Finance has always been at the forefront of innovation. We've always found a way for finance to flow through borders, through people. If there is such a need, it's like water; it'll also always flow towards where it's always required. So, I do think that social impact bonds, in its classic sense, is not just to be confined to a particular audience or a particular market. It can be deployed into various situations, as long as we are able to find an investor who is willing to take on the risk, who's going to be happy with the returns that they would get, and finding a service provider and a funder. It can be cross-border, and it could be in any situation that you would want to apply yourself to.
Yeah, thanks, Jones. And anybody else have any thoughts on that one? Yeah, Mika?
Thank you. This is not the right direct answer to the question, but comment which comes very close. A couple of our investors who are involved to our refugee social impact bond, they are there because that is the way how they get quality employees. You know, they are investing to the intervention in order to get new employees to their companies. I think that is quite nice story also.
Certainly. Somebody go on mute. I don't know who. Shireen, did you want to go?
Yeah, just to complement what the others were saying. You know, obviously the multilateral development banks and the IFC, the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, the EBRD, these are all institutions that are very interested in looking at social impact bonds and other innovative finance tools. And I think what we've noticed, at least so far, is that, you know, you talked about risk. And ultimately, that's what it's about. If we're talking about social impact bonds in developing countries, the risk is obviously much higher. And what's the price of that risk? And that makes the returns much less digestible, I think, for the humanitarian community. So I think when you talk about Finland and you talk about 5 to 8 or 10% in terms of returns, that's something that may be acceptable. But if you look at higher risk environments where the majority of refugees are being hosted, that's a nut we haven't been able to crack yet. So indeed, there are multiple actors that can work in this space: governments, multilateral development banks, private sector, but what we've found so far is that it's governments are those that are willing to come in first, and we're hoping that they are able to de-risk investments for investors, but we haven't seen that second part yet. And we're hoping to be able to see that over time.
Yeah, it'd be great to see more sort of private foundations stepping up to the plate here as well. I think they're in many respects kind of freed from some of those concerns that were just outlined. I mean, many of the foundations that we work with, I think, are more willing to assume a higher level of risk for working within developing nations, but are also more willing to experiment and see whether they can obtain a higher level of return than maybe some others who need to guarantee a certain level. And there definitely are private foundations that have engaged in this space and, you know, are thinking about innovative financial instruments, but I think there definitely could be more. And there definitely could be more sort of experimentation and innovation in this space, given, yeah, as I say, they are sort of sometimes free from some of those constraints.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think the private foundation piece.
If I may, can.
Oh, yeah, go, Maha. Hello.
Hello. Okay, so just about, I didn't hear, so I'm sorry if I'm saying something relevant, but I think that the risk is an issue only because we don't have sufficient track record on this instrument. From my point of view, it's an instrument which is not so risky, and it's a commercial bank saying that, a foundation, not a philanthropic actor. But because of this very specific focus, very targeted, it's a very targeted intervention on targeted specific public. So the probability that it doesn't have impact is, from my point of view, very, very small. This is for the when you when we bet on refugees, actually, we see that they high percentages of skills. They have very high also entrepreneurship skills that make their enterprises very successful when they obtain. The problem that they have is access. They have no access to banking, employment, no access to papers, no access. The problem, it's not the skills. We can see that what they achieve is it's often very of a very high quality than standard achievements. So
Okay, I mean, I think we got the point from Maha there, and I, it actually leads nicely into this other question that we have here, which we've basically got about a minute to answer. But it was a question really about mitigating the drivers for migration in the first place. So the question was about using EU or US companies who could work in countries like Iran, etc., so that the kind of migration exporter countries could be assisted to provide better situations in those locations to decrease the number of refugees. And, I think that's also a really important part of this puzzle. And in fact, if you look at what Maha was saying about skills and about, actual abilities of refugees, that's a real skills drain from countries which also needs to be addressed. So I don't know if anybody wants to take on that topic very briefly before we move to some closing thoughts.
I'm happy to jump in again. Sorry to dominate, but just to say in very simple terms, indeed, absolutely, that's a big part of the Global Compact on Refugees is the push for investment in originating countries as well as in hosting countries. And as a result of the 2015 Global Compact, the World Bank did approve these concessional loans to countries where refugees are originating or being hosted. And this has been very slow to be implemented, but it is allowing for a significant investment in the infrastructure, at least as a starting point. And what we know for a fact is that if there's infrastructure, also for countries where refugees may be able to go back, then if that infrastructure exists, it may create better chances for them to return to their originating country. So it's something that we are promoting, but it is very difficult, again, due to some of the risks to implement. But we work also in Bangladesh and other places. I think just lastly to say, I think someone else mentioned it as well. I think Maha, I mean, you can have a job at UNHCR any day in terms of all of your enthusiasm for the positive contribution of refugees globally. And I would also add to that obviously the situation is very different in each country. And in many, many countries, refugees are not allowed to work. And that is one of the reasons why we encourage business to help us in that advocacy effort. But it's a continuous process in trying to address the root causes as well as assist refugees in staying close to home.
Thanks, Shireen. Okay, we'll go around the rest for one key thought before we wrap up. So maybe Helen, starting with you.
Yeah, of course. Well, only I would say this because I work for a research organization, but I do think that we need a lot more evidence and evaluation of what's being done in this space to understand what really works and what doesn't. And we need to be able to consolidate those lessons learned and disseminate them well. I think there's definitely pockets of a lot of super exciting things happening, and we've heard about a lot of them today, but often we don't hear about these things, and people will try something that's already been tried before and being found to not work in a different context. So the more we can do to kind of share these experiences and evaluate them, the better.
Thank you. Cedric?
Yes, I fully agree with, back to what Maha said. That's where we need to bring more value on, because we need definitely to invest on those refugees which are more skilled and to let them grow with also the capital that we can bring on the table. And as a financial institution, this is exactly the philosophy that we have in mind by bringing, let's say, this new opportunity, also still our customer. So by bringing innovation to product, we are also linking the dots with what refugee can offer in order to build up, let's say, the new world with new company and new skills, definitely.
Thank you. Mika?
Thank you. I'm not sure if my final words are so sophisticated, but I'm always saying that real and sustainable impact is based on co-creation and collaboration. And that means that we really need the whole ecosystem in order to achieve what we want. And I think it was Sharon who mentioned already that whole society approach, and we see that very crucial. And the other thing is that I mentioned co-creation, that we have a very strong feeling that we really had to be able to combine that kind of hard data about which we discussed already, and grassroots level experiences coming from different professionals, and combining those two elements, we are really able to create solid basis for this kind of new interventions. Thank you.
Thanks. Liz, couple of sentences.
Yeah, I think just echoing what Sharon was talking about before we went around is, the idea of investing in places so we can hopefully prevent some of the migration from happening. And I do think it's on companies who are, sourcing globally to make those investments, and then also ensure the workers are receiving fair treatment, fair labor practices are being employed, and that if there are refugees in those communities already, that they are able to engage in the same way. So I think the example Helen shared around H&M, I think, is really powerful, of the roles that companies can play to actually improve the situation instead of potentially making it worse.
Yeah. Did you have a last word?
Is it my?
Yeah, would you like to? Yeah.
Yes. Sorry, I was just reconnected. So maybe my final, I don't know, it's a complicated thematic should be treated in a way, as I was saying, with everything is interdependent with this thematic. If we bring resources like, I think innovative finance is interesting, but should be mixed with philanthropic public funding, but also voluntaries from the population. I think the population has a huge role to play in refugee, and there's also a big thing about access to rights. I think this is one of the main lever to connect and then have a combined intervention. This is the way that we can resolve the topic, combining all the topics with innovation, employment, in housing, in education, in language, in entrepreneurship. I think those are the way that we could help solve the issue, or put it a little bit easier for the refugees to integrate. And again, sorry about my intervention ethics.
You've all been persevered very well today. And last word for me is just to really thank everybody so much for your really valuable contributions. And thank you to the audience as well for sticking with us and for the questions that were raised. Yeah, it's been a fascinating discussion, and every time I participate in something like this, I think we just need to do more. So hopefully, the audience has enjoyed, and if you've got any questions, you can follow up with anybody who's on the panel afterwards. And thank you again. Thank you very much, everybody.